the recording, and we're really going to jump into this. So if you have any questions, please jump in at any time and just throw in your chat. Otherwise, really what you're here for today is how to come up with a great idea. And I love this topic. The reason I love this topic is my father's actually an inventor, so it was always really fun for me to watch him come up with his really great ideas. I've also worked in the innovation side for Coca-Cola, as well as for some nonprofits. And then finally, I actually did work at Canadian Pacific Railway, and I had won about 4 actually innovation awards. So clearly I like making up ideas and making them happen. And really that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to do this. And why is this topic important? Well, for entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs, or someone who wants to be an entrepreneur, sometimes you just want to do something bigger and better, and you know that you could improve what you're doing, but you really don't know what's the big idea or how to find that. And it's interesting because people, apparently, I don't know exactly how they figured out this stat, but people come up with $3 million ideas a year. And it could be that it just pops up to them and there's different ways and approaches that it can hit them. But maybe they don't actually recognize it as an opportunity. So maybe they come up with an idea, but they don't recognize it as an opportunity. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as well, because what's the point of having a great big idea if you actually can't convert it into an opportunity? So what we're going to talk about today is what classifies a new idea. So is it actually an idea, and what types of ideas are out there? So that's going to maybe get you thinking a little bit more creatively already, where you can find them, and then how do you know if it is in fact a good idea? So the very first part here is what classifies, and really we use the definition of a patent, but that doesn't mean that that's across the board the only way to know if an idea is a good or a new idea. But really the first thing is novel. So are you the first one of its kind? So if you basically go some other area, maybe down the street from you, and you see that they're doing it and you do it as well, well, obviously that's not an idea. I mean, I would say that there is some controversy here, because obviously if you see someone else doing something and you think you could do it better, well, that's novel, and we'll talk about what that would look like as well. Number 2 is it has to be useful. So probably the best argument here is that the pet rock was not really useful. However, it ended up being a great idea and a multi-million-dollar idea, but really in general, we wouldn't classify that one as a great idea because it wasn't actually functional. It didn't actually add potential value. And then the last one is inventive. So is it obvious or not to others? So is it something that was outside of the box, or were you inside of the box on something that you have created? Is it something that anyone could have come up with? So now that we have our definitions of what is a new idea, really looking at where we can find them. And I have lots of really interesting examples here. The first one is obviously you can find them in your own personal experience. And my own example on this, and not that I actually did the opportunity on all of these, but my personal example here was that I was one day sitting on a bus, and I was opening up my newspaper, and you know, a traditional newspaper is quite huge. So I also wanted to have my coffee. So how can you do all these things at once? And I realized that it would be really neat to actually have a portable coffee holder. And I never actually went through with it because, I mean, obviously there would have to be quite a bit of expense in doing the prototype and rolling it out. But it was interesting because my daughter actually did it in her marketing class, and they thought that it was a great idea to have something that actually clamps to some of the poles, so that really that you can actually do multiple things and don't always have to hold your coffee. Are there going to be problems with that? Potentially as well. But that was from my personal experience. I saw my own problem and I was like, hey, it'd be great if I had this. My father actually came up with the selfie stick about 10 years ago, so even before it was a thing. And so he created it 10 years ago, and he's had his own personal selfie stick for that long, and it's because it was from his personal experience. He would travel with my mother, and he would say, hey, who's going to take our picture? Oh, I got this. I'll figure it out. Yes, and this is being recorded. For the next one, it would be hobbies or things that you do. So very recently, I've taken up golf. And the interesting thing here for me was that I'm like, okay, golf is great. And, I'd always have my caddy. Not always. I wish I always did. I need a caddy. But then I started watching a little bit of golf. And one thing that really got me was that, hey, one second, why aren't there more female caddies? And it was really interesting because I thought it would be really neat to actually have a female caddy service. And 2 days ago on Dragon's Den, I actually saw them pitch the female caddy service. But I'd come up with that idea because it was a new hobby that I was taking on, and all of a sudden, it sparked a light bulb for me. Another way is going to be accidental. So accidental, this is one of my favorite stories here, is Leon's furniture was actually done accidentally. So wow, really? So what happened is that they originally had the family in Welland, Ontario, had a little convenience store. And one day, an apartment that was above the convenience store ended up putting out a mattress. I guess they were trying to throw it away. And an individual came by the convenience store and said, hey, how much do you want for that mattress? And they said, I'd be willing to pay X amount. And all of a sudden, the little convenience store owners, the Leons, they decided, hey, that seems to have a lot more margin and seems to be maybe an opportunity, and it's something that people are looking for. So wow, accidentally, Leon's furniture is created. Then there's intentional ones. And intentional ones are maybe what you would classify as an inventor typically doing. So you're going, okay, so I want to see if I can achieve this. Probably my best example, well, not best example, but a good example of this is DataWind. So DataWind is actually a technology company that decided to make, their social enterprise, decided to make hardware more affordable. So laptops and tablets more affordable. So they intentionally were like, I see this as a need and I'm going to figure this out. And so intentionally, they started going through how to do that, and they ended up creating their own intellectual property that allowed, and processes as well, that allowed them to actually make a tablet that's only $35. And that made that technology more available in third world countries. So they had their goal, they saw that there was a need, and then they intentionally drove towards meeting that. And the last one here, and I'm sure that there's other things, but new information is another key way to have a new idea. And my best example of this one right now, because it's very timely, is that Sick Kids just actually did some research, and finally it's a 10-year study that the results came back showing that if you introduce highly allergenic foods, so if you can get allergies from them easily, you should actually be introducing that earlier in children in order to avoid them having an allergy. And in their 10-year study, they figured out that actually if you introduce like eggs and peanut butter and milk earlier in a child's development, there's 70% chance less likely to actually get an allergy. So this is brand new stuff. And what's really neat about that is that when you have new information like this, maybe we're going to have new innovations. So maybe a baby food company would go, oh, if that's true, well, all the existing baby food doesn't have all of these types of peanut butter, peanuts, other nuts, lactose in it. So maybe we actually should have a line that introduces that based on this new information. So really interesting where ideas come from and how we can expose ourselves to these situations so that we actually start seeing these ideas. But you can see even on my personal level, all the way to Leon's furniture, that people are looking and using these formats of finding out new ideas. So the next thing is, what type of ideas are there out there? So if you think about your own business, your own organization, there are all these different ways to actually be creative. And as we go through them, you can think, hey, is that a possibility for my business? So the first one is a new product or service. So this one's pretty standard. I mean, you can come up with something that's brand new, so a new innovation, you have a prototype, you have a new patent with a new intellectual property. That's something that you're adding in. So I'm not going to go too far into that one. The only thing I'm going to say about that is that making sure that you have some way to weed out and test up front what makes sense and what doesn't. Typically, when we're looking at new products, new services, they have a very high failure rate. If we look at groceries, it's like 1 in 1,000 new grocery products that come into your grocery stores actually make it. So making sure that you have a way to actually evaluate whether or not to move forward with it. The second one would be a new process. So when I first started at CP Rail, I remember it being really frustrating because it was actually my first week I came up with this idea, is I came in and I realized that when we were talking to customers, it would take us 3 days to get back to them with a price because we had to talk to other railroads. So when I came in, I was like, I don't want to wait 3 days to tell my customers that they're going to have to wait 3 days. So in my first week there, I said, oh, I think we need a new process. We actually need to add in that we tell them up front it's going to take them 3 days to get the price, and maybe start introducing them to the process like the credit check and other things so we can expedite their customer service later on or their service delivery later on. So it's interesting, process changes often by having someone with a new lens, a new point of view is a great way to handle that. Another one would be a new market. So if you're already in Canada or maybe you're already in Ontario or already in Toronto or already in Vancouver, can you expand out? Something that's kind of interesting is a lot of small businesses in Canada actually tell me they prefer selling to Americans and that there's actually higher adoption rates there. So maybe that's where you're already selling, and can you bring it back to Canada? Small Business Solver, we're pretty interesting in that we're actually looking at going into the African market because most business is actually done in English, so there wouldn't have to be a language conversion. So interesting things that happen out there. New inputs. So do you have new raw materials? I was telling you guys about DataWind, who had created this new prototype that allows it to be a laptop that's $35. Well, part of that innovation ended up being the inputs. So what they do, as opposed to have the latest and greatest, like let's say what Apple does, which then they have a price premium for that, they actually would use the technology that Apple is no longer manufacturing with. So they probably have that inventory already in place, and they buy that in batch orders at the lower price and are able to then have a fairly competitive when it comes to technology. It might be 1, 2, or 3 rounds behind, but you know what? 3 years ago, iPads were still pretty good. So that's how they handle it, is actually being creative on the inputs of what they put in. Structure or a new business model. This one could also be something that's brand new or something to consider for your own organization. One of the most common ones is actually for nonprofits. People who have social innovations and they want to have this brand new idea and launch, they often don't want to have actually their own structure like the nonprofit or a charity structure that then requires a board of directors. So Tides Canada, so TIDES, actually created it where you can actually do a shared platform. So if you don't want to actually have your own board of directors, you can actually join into Tides, and they run your board. They have advisory boards. They kind of do the back end of the nonprofit logistics for you, and that for Tides is a brand new structure or business model that they've used, and it's very popular within the nonprofit sector. Then new customer connections. So I think that websites and apps, that's kind of a no-brainer, but are there other ways that you can connect and that you're starting to learn about? That would be a brand new innovation. Are you getting feedback? I mean, the Pepsi Taste Challenge was a very creative way, and it actually increased awareness and was one of the most well-known promotions out there. In fact, Pepsi Taste Challenge is more well-known than any promotion that Coca-Cola has. New financing. So is there a different way to actually finance what you're doing? Another example, again, for for-profit or nonprofit. For for-profit, all of a sudden you have all these crowdfunding sites. So is that a new way to do it or launch something? And then I know on the nonprofit side, community bonds, social financing. those are things that are being more and more investigated. And even cooperatives. I know that decades ago, that was basically the main way that things were structured when it came to financing models. And yet now it moved away, but potentially it makes sense for some industries to consider cooperatives again. And then new human resources. Definitely with the world becoming a smaller and smaller place, doing overseas sourcing, or maybe working with people in rural areas, finding people who maybe are marginalized. So there's all these different ways that maybe you can actually leverage human resources that are going to be different. So even thinking about these alternatives of what types of new ideas are out there might start percolating for you some ideas that you might want to consider and might be worthwhile for your own business. And so the last piece here, now that we have all this in place, we have to figure out if we do, in fact, have a good idea. And this is very important. I mean, we talked about the process already, that you have to actually do the innovation funnel and have an evaluation criteria for new products or services. But you really have to do this for all good ideas. And the reason being is that implementing a new good idea takes resources, be it time and or money. And so because of that, you want to make sure that you're spending your time on what is the most worthwhile. And when I was at Coke, I actually introduced the innovation funnel, and it's something that I also am doing as the manager of new initiatives for one of my clients. So this is very, very important. Number one is then the environmental analysis. And that's just looking at what are the risks or what are the opportunities out there. PEST is an acronym that you could look at the political, economic, social, and technology spectrum out there. And another thing is just understanding how competitive it is already. That's a really good gauge of if there's a lot of people in the marketplace, is that going to be a problem for you? And if there isn't right now, well, what's the likelihood of new ones coming into the market? The next thing is going to be your internal and external analysis, or more internal. So you still have your strengths, whether or not you're passionate about something, and then your weaknesses internally. So are you actually able to do this? And you can't underestimate your own personal strengths and passion, because as an entrepreneur, if you're not super passionate about what you're doing, then obviously it's probably not going to work as well as you'd like it to. And yes, you do have to do validation. Thank you. And it's always doing the market research here, making sure that people are actually willing to buy. And that is the market analysis part here. So are people, in fact, willing to pay? And that's probably the hugest piece here, is that are people seeing enough value? Are people seeing enough benefits to actually pay for it? The interesting thing I always think on this one is that it's been proven that people are psychologically more tied to a $20 bill in their hand than they are to a $20 bill in your hand. So if it's in their hand or your hand, they're not actually indifferent. They would rather keep the $20 in their own hand. They get psychologically tied to it. So as a marketer, as a salesperson, as an entrepreneur, that poses a huge challenge for us in terms of making sure that we have that extra value so that people are in fact willing to pay for it. And the final piece in terms of your own evaluation criteria would definitely be reachability. So there could be a huge marketplace out there. There could be a lot of people who may buy your new product or idea or your good idea. Well, if you can't reach them, if you can't get the message in front of them, if you can't generate that awareness, that is a huge factor for you to be considering. There's a lot of other different assessments that you can use out there. If you do have a social innovation side, there's actually a social innovation assessment tool. Definitely email me on that and I can send it over to you. And then there's other ones that you can be looking at, we have a Will It Fly assessment tool, so you can actually test your own idea. That's a for-profit for starting up a business, and that's free on our website as well. And I can actually just show you that to you guys. If you wanted to test that one, that's on Small Business Solver under the Small Business Tools, Will It Fly? And here you can actually take the task to see. You answer about 8 questions, and it will tell you your break-even analysis and all the details that you need to know of whether or not it's going to fly or not. So wrapping this up then, what we covered is what is a new idea, what types of new ideas are there, where can you find them, and then the most important part, as Peter noted for us as well, is validation, is really doing that work. So it doesn't matter if you have $150 million ideas if you can't spot that opportunity and validate it before you get started. So at this point, I am going to stop the recording, but leave this open for additional questions. So if you have questions, please add that in.